There are 1,000 of them, 1,000 white demons who came to steal the only thing I have left." The cry tore through Anya's dry throat, a YAKUT elder whose wrinkles looked like maps of endless winters. At -71 degrees Celsius, the air froze in her nostrils, but the terror was even colder when the horde of albino tigers, with hungry eyes glowing like spectral embers in the polar darkness, emerged from the blizzard, advancing on her small herd of yaks. Alone, with no weapons but her courage and the wisdom of her ancestors, Anya knew this was the final moment. And what she did next would decide not only the fate of her animals, but the very soul of the tundra. The cry echoed faintly in the rarefied air, swallowed by the white immensity. Anya waited for no reply, her eyes, accustomed to scanning infinite horizons, now fixed on the moving mass, a pale and deadly wave approaching with terrifying speed. Panic threatened to constrict her chest, but she pushed it deep into her soul, where the unwavering flame of her people resided. The yaks, sensing the change in the air, began to low softly, their warm breaths forming dense clouds that dissipated in the biting cold. They were her family, an extension of her very being, the promise of a tomorrow for the village that depended on her. Anya closed her eyes for a brief moment, seeking strength that came not from tired muscles, but from memory. She saw her mother's face, her father's calloused hands, the stories told around the campfire, the lessons about respecting nature and the cunning needed to survive it. "The wind always blows in your favor, if you know how to listen to it," an ancient voice whispered in her mind. She opened her eyes, and in them there was no longer terror, but an icy determination, as sharp as the air she breathed. Her movements, though slow with age and cold, were deliberate and purposeful. She could not fight 1,000 tigers with bare hands, but she could fight with her mind, with the terrain, with the very spirit of Yakutia. The first thing to do was to protect the youngest and most vulnerable. With a guttural cry, a mixture of command and plea, she began to gather the yaks. Her herding dogs, 2 old and loyal huskies named Boar and Lena, who had been huddled until then, sensed the urgency in her voice and sprang into action, barking and pushing the animals closer to Anya. The yaks, accustomed to her leadership, formed a tight circle, the strongest, with their imposing horns facing outwards, protecting the calves and mothers in the center. Anya ran to the back of the herd, her feet sinking into the deep snow, but her eyes sweeping the landscape. She needed a distraction, something to break the tiger's initial charge. Her gaze fell upon a small rise of ice and rocks a few dozen meters away, covered by a thin layer of snow. It wasn't much, but it might serve. With an effort that made her bones protest, she began to push a large, loose stone, covered in frozen moss. The stone was heavy, but urgency propelled her. Her gloved fingers slipped on the ice, but she persisted, her face contorted with effort. Finally, with a groan, the stone gave way, rolling downhill with a dull thud, dragging snow and small fragments of ice with it. It wasn't a loud bang, but enough to draw attention. The tiger horde, advancing like a silent avalanche, hesitated for a second. Some of the younger predators, curious and less disciplined, diverted their gaze to the noise. Anya knew it was just an instant, a tiny reprieve. But it was enough to buy time. She needed more than that. Her eyes gleamed with ancestral cunning as she observed the tiger's reaction. They were many, but they were also creatures of instinct, and instinct could be manipulated. The first step was taken. Now, she needed to think like the wind, like the ice, like the very heart of the tundra, to protect what was hers. The extreme cold was not just an enemy, but also a tool, and Anya was about to use it wisely. Anya felt the icy embrace of the wind, not as an enemy, but as an invisible ally, a whisper from the spirits of the tundra. Her eyes scanned the terrain, searching for hidden weaknesses in the frozen landscape. A few meters away, a series of small cracks and ice ledges stretched out, almost imperceptible beneath the fresh snow. She remembered her grandfather's stories, told on winter nights, about how ice, though solid and imposing, could be treacherous, with thin layers and fragile bridges forming and dissolving with subtle temperature changes. That was it. That would be her battlefield, where nature itself would fight by her side if she knew how to invoke it. With a quick, determined nod, Anya called Boar and Lena. The huskies, intelligent and attuned to their mistress's every move, ran to her, their bushy tails wagging in anticipation, their blue eyes fixed on her. "Distract them," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the cold, pointing to the horde that was beginning to react to the falling stone, some tigers growling and starting to advance again, with heavy steps. "Keep them at bay, away from the yaks, but without risking yourselves too much." The dogs, understanding the urgency in her tone, and with sharp barks and calculated runs, began to flank the pack, drawing the attention of the more curious and impatient predators. It was a dangerous dance, a ballet of life and death in the snow, but they were masters of it, trained for generations. While the dogs diverted their focus, Anya began to work with a silent urgency. Her gloved fingers, though stiff from the biting cold, moved with surprising precision, guided by years of experience. She knew she needed more than just noise. She needed an illusion, something to make the tigers hesitate, to make them doubt the ground beneath their powerful paws. Nearby there was a small spring that, despite the extreme cold, still bubbled faintly beneath a thinner layer of ice, a vulnerable spot in the tundra's armor. With the tip of her wooden staff, she began to test the surrounding ice, looking for the weakest points, feeling the resonance beneath her feet. Anya moved with the agility of a young woman, driven by adrenaline and the memory of her loved ones, whose faces flickered in her mind. She found the right spot, a thin crust that cracked softly under calculated pressure. Quickly, she began to dig, not to break the ice completely, but to create a series of small, superficial cracks, almost invisible from a distance, that would spread like treacherous spiderwebs. Then she picked up a handful of small stones and threw them onto the cracked ice. The sound, amplified by the oppressive silence of the tundra, was like dry bones breaking, a subtle and sinister warning. The tigers, who were already approaching again, stopped abruptly, their ears perked up, their amber eyes focused on the strange sound. The gaze of one of the younger tigers, a sturdy male with a pale scar over his left eye, was drawn to the spot where Anya had worked. He took a cautious step, sniffing the icy air, feeling the strange vibration on the frozen ground. The ice, already weakened, emitted a low, sharp groan under his weight, a sound that made the tiger instinctively recoil, his pupils dilating in caution. Anya watched, her heart pounding in her chest, a mixture of hope and exhaustion. It wasn't enough to drive away 1,000 hungry tigers, but it was enough to sow doubt. Distrust was a powerful weapon against blind hunger and predatory instinct. She needed more than that. Her eyes gleamed with ancestral cunning as she observed the tiger's reaction. They were many, but they were also creatures of instinct, and instinct could be manipulated. The first step was taken. Now, she needed to think like the wind, like the ice, like the very heart of the tundra, to protect what was hers. The extreme cold was not just an enemy, but also a tool, and Anya was about to use it wisely. Anya, with steady hands despite the cold and tension, brought out her flint and dry tinder. The metallic click of the spark against the stone echoed in the silence, a tiny sound, a promise of life. With a careful breath, the tinder smoldered, and soon a small orange flame danced against the wind. She fed the fire with dry twigs and moss, transforming the spark into a growing bonfire. The warmth, once comfort, was now a weapon. The flames rose, painting the snow with golden hues, casting dancing shadows. The tigers, who had been advancing cautiously, stopped. The fire, a strange element in the icy landscape, awakened in them both fascination and ancestral fear. Their bright eyes reflected the flames, and some recoiled, growling softly. The leader, however, stood firm, his posture imposing. He watched Anya and the fire with calculating intensity, trying to unravel the trick of light and heat. Anya felt the weight of the leader's gaze, a silent battle of wills. She knew the fire wouldn't keep them away forever. It was a psychological distraction, but hunger was stronger. With renewed effort, she dragged the crackling bonfire towards the prepared ice cracks. Each step was a struggle, the weight of the wood and the penetrating cold. But the image of the yaks and the future of the village propelled her. She needed to create a barrier of heat and light. Boar and Lena, realizing the new strategy, intensified their barking, running in circles, keeping the young tigers at a distance. They were Anya's eyes and ears, her companions. The elder, her face marked by effort and smoke, strategically positioned the bonfire along the edge of the cracks where the ice was thinnest. The heat of the flames interacted with the ice, creating a faint vapor, a ghostly spectacle confusing the predators. The tiger leader finally made his move. With a powerful growl, he advanced, ignoring fire and cracks, aiming for a more solid spot on the edge of the fissure. He was fearless, a supreme predator, and Anya knew her cunning would be tested to its limit. She raised her staff, not as a weapon, but as an extension of her will, pointing to the weakened spot. Her eyes met the leader's, an exchange of challenges. The tiger hesitated for 1,000th of a second, sensing the vibration in Anya's gaze or the fragility of the ice. But hunger was a cruel master. He took the final step. The ice groaned, a sharp drawn-out sound, and a new crack opened, not large enough to make him fall, but enough to unbalance him. He roared, recoiling a step, his claws scratching the ice. Anya smiled, a tired but victorious smile. The horde leader had been outsmarted. Doubt began to sprout. Anya knew it was just the beginning. The horde was still there, hungry, but their unity had been broken, their trust in their leader shaken. She needed to capitalize on this moment to turn hesitation into retreat. Her eyes swept the landscape, searching for the next step, the trap the tundra offered. The wind howled, bringing the promise of more cold, but also inspiration for the next phase of her struggle. Her connection to the land and ancestral teachings was her compass, guiding her through danger. She was the guardian. She would not retreat. Anya felt the cold kiss her wrinkled cheeks, but the flame of her determination burned stronger than any wind. The tiger leader, the one with the dense mane and amber eyes, recoiled but did not surrender. His growl, though contained, carried the frustration of a supreme predator outsmarted. The horde, once a unified mass of white fur and hunger, now showed fissures. Some younger tigers, seeing their leader's hesitation, began to stir, sniffing the air, their instincts conflicting between hunger and newly perceived danger. Trust, like thin ice, began to crack. The elder knew this was the crucial moment. Doubt had been planted, but it needed to be watered with more cunning, more wisdom. Her eyes, which had witnessed countless winters and the relentless dance of life and death on the tundra, swept the icy horizon. She sought not a weapon, but a solution, an echo of her ancestors' teachings. A few meters away, where the terrain sloped abruptly, there was a peculiar geological formation, a deep fissure, almost hidden by the snow, stretching like a scar across the landscape. It was not a superficial crack, but a true ice gorge, a treacherous abyss that opened into the frozen depths. It was there that the final confrontation would take place. With a nod, Anya called Boar and Lena. The huskies, who had kept the more impatient tigers at bay, ran to her, their panting breaths forming small clouds in the air. "We need to guide them," she whispered, pointing to the fissure. "The yaks must move east, to the more sheltered area." You two, help me push the yaks, but carefully. We cannot scare them any further. The dogs, with an almost human intelligence, began to bark and gently nip at the yaks' flanks, slowly moving them away from the area of imminent danger. As the yaks moved, Anya took a handful of dry moss and thin twigs she had collected earlier and threw them onto the bonfire, stoking the flames. The fire crackled with greater intensity, and the dense, fragrant smoke began to rise, mixing with the vapor from the melting ice. She knew that the smell and sight would be another layer of confusion for the tigers, a sensory distraction that would keep them focused on the fire while she set the stage for the leader. Her movements were calculated, each step a silent prayer to the spirits of the land. She walked with determination towards the fissure, stopping at a safe but visible distance. The tiger leader, with his cold intelligence, noticed her maneuver. His amber eyes followed Anya's every move, and a low, guttural growl escaped his throat. He knew she was the center of everything, the source of resistance, and the hunger in his eyes intensified, mixed with a hint of reluctant respect. Anya knew she needed to lure him, not with fear, but with the promise of prey. She pulled a small piece of dried yak meat from her parka pocket, an emergency supply she kept for herself. The scent, subtle to humans, would be a feast for the tiger's keen sense of smell. With a slow, deliberate movement, she threw the piece of meat onto the edge of the fissure, not inside, but close enough that the leader would have to approach dangerously to reach it. The tiger leader froze. His eyes fixed on the meat, ancestral hunger battled newly acquired caution. He sniffed the air, sensing the tempting smell, and his tail began to lash slowly in the snow. Anya stood firm, her eyes fixed on his, a silent battle of wills. She would not retreat. The life of her village, the future of her yaks, everything depended on that moment, on that strategic confrontation. She was the bait, the guardian, and she was ready to challenge nature's wildest fury with the unbreakable resilience of her spirit. The leader took a hesitant step, then another, drawn by the promise of meat and the challenge in the elder's gaze. He was approaching the fissure, the point of no return. The leader took a hesitant step, then another, drawn by the promise of meat and the challenge in the elder's gaze. He was approaching the fissure, the point of no return. Each soft yet powerful paw sank slightly into the snow, bringing him closer to the treacherous edge. His amber eyes, fixed on the meat, gleamed with a primal intensity. But there was also a shadow of doubt, a remnant of the lesson learned from the cracked ice. Anya did not blink. Her body, though bent with age and cold, radiated a silent strength, an unbreakable barrier of will. She was the embodiment of the tundra, relentless and wise. The tiger stopped a meter from the fissure, his snout stretched out, sniffing the air. The smell of meat was irresistible, but the icy abyss ahead was a palpable threat. He growled softly, a sound of frustration and desire. The horde, observing their leader's every move, was in a tense silence, their bodies taut, ready to follow, but also awaiting a sign of weakness or strength. Boar and Lena, at a safe distance, kept the yaks grouped together, their sporadic barks breaking the stillness, but without diverting attention from the main confrontation. With a sudden movement, the leader lunged, not to jump, but to stretch out his paw and reach for the meat. His muscles contracted, and he stretched dangerously over the edge. It was then that Anya acted, not with violence, but with a deep knowledge of the terrain. She had noticed a small, almost invisible ice ledge that precariously jutted out over the fissure. With the tip of her staff, she delivered a precise and light tap to the base of the ledge. Not enough to break it completely, but enough to destabilize it. The ice groaned. A sharp, drawn-out sound echoed, and the ledge, under the tiger's weight and tension, gave way slightly. There was no fall, no injury, but the leader lost his balance. His front paw slipped, and he found himself hanging for an instant, his claws desperately scratching the smooth ice of the edge. A roar of surprise and anger escaped his throat, and he pulled himself back with tremendous effort, falling belly-first into the snow, the yak meat forgotten. The entire horde witnessed the scene. The leader, the supreme predator, the invincible, had been outsmarted again, humiliated by the elder's cunning and the treacherous nature of the ice. A murmur of disorientation ran through the pack. Some tigers instinctively recoiled, their tails between their legs. The leader's aura of invincibility dissolved like mist in the sun. He rose slowly, shaking the snow from his fur, his amber eyes now fixed on Anya with a mixture of fury and a newfound respect. He had been overcome not by strength, but by her intelligence and her deep connection to the land. Anya, exhausted but with a victorious glint in her eyes, raised her staff again, not to threaten, but to reassert her sovereignty over that piece of tundra. She needed no more. The message had been delivered. The leader, with a final growl of frustration, turned and began to move away, not in a disordered retreat, but with the wounded dignity of a dethroned king. Slowly, one by one, the other tigers followed his example. The ghostly horde, once a cohesive and terrifying threat, began to disperse, disappearing into the blizzard, their white forms merging with the landscape. Silence returned, broken only by the howl of the wind and the soft lowing of the yaks, who seemed to feel the relief. Anya fell to her knees in the snow, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her heart filled with profound gratitude. She had saved her herd, the hope of her village. True strength, she knew, lay not in youth or physical might, but in the resilience of the human spirit and the wisdom of ancestors. Boar and Lena approached, rubbing their muzzles against her hands, offering their silent comfort. The battle was over, and Anya, the guardian of the tundra, had prevailed. Anya fell to her knees in the snow, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her heart filled with profound gratitude. The howl of the wind, once a harbinger of danger, was now a distant lament. Boar and Lena approached, their warm, damp muzzles rubbing against her gloved hands, a silent comfort. She stroked their heads, feeling their unwavering loyalty. The yaks, previously agitated, now huddled closer, their lowing expressing relief. The tiger horde had vanished, their white forms swallowed by the intensifying blizzard in the distance, transforming them into mere ghosts of an overcome threat. The elder closed her eyes, feeling the cold penetrate her bones, but also a wave of warmth in her chest. It was the warmth of victory, of overcoming. Images of her ancestors, of her grandfather with wise eyes and her mother with a gentle smile, danced in her mind. They had taught her that the tundra was a teacher, a source of wisdom for those who knew how to listen. She listened. She used the ice, the fire, the wind, and the predator's hunger against them. True strength, she knew, resided not in youth or physical might, but in the unbreakable resilience of the human spirit and in reverence for the teachings of those who came before. With a heavy sigh, Anya tried to stand. Her muscles protested, stiff and sore, each movement a torture. Her legs, which had carried her through hours of tension, now felt like lead. She leaned on her staff, feeling the weight of years and battle. Boar and Lena, sensing her difficulty, positioned themselves beside her, offering support. She smiled weakly at them, grateful for their constant presence. As she rose, her eyes, accustomed to reading nature's subtle signs, swept the horizon. The blizzard, which had seemed distant before, now advanced with alarming speed. The wind, which had been howling, now hissed with renewed fury, and the temperature, already glacial, seemed to drop drastically. A shiver, different from the usual cold of Yakutia, ran down her spine. It was not a common blizzard. It was an ice storm, one of those that could freeze life in hours, trapping everything under a white and merciless shroud. Anya felt the dense, heavy air, the metallic scent of the deepening frost. Her lips tightened. The yaks, safe from the tigers, were now exposed to a more insidious and pervasive danger. The village, a day's journey away, would be unreachable in such a storm. They needed shelter, and fast. The relief of victory dissolved, replaced by new urgency. The battle against the tigers had drained her last reserves of energy, and now the tundra, her ally, turned against them with overwhelming fury. She looked at Boar and Lena, whose lowered ears and tense bodies sensed the change in the environment. They too understood the gravity. The journey back, which should have been a triumph, had turned into a desperate race against time and the elements. Anya knew she could not fail. The life of her herd and the hope of the village depended on her once more. With her eyes fixed on the approaching storm, she began to search for a new path, a refuge, invoking the ancestral wisdom that pulsed in her veins. The elder's unbreakable spirit, though exhausted, refused to yield. The fight for survival was far from over. Anya, her heart still vibrating from the recent victory, felt the icy air bite her wrinkled cheeks. The blizzard, once a distant threat, now swallowed the horizon with frightening voracity. The wind hissed, no longer a howl, but a furious lament that promised to freeze even the soul. Her eyes, which had seen countless winters, recognized the unmistakable signs of an ice storm, one of those that could turn the tundra into a deadly trap in a few hours. The relief of victory against the tigers evaporated, replaced by an icy urgency. She leaned on her staff, her legs trembling with exhaustion, but her mind was sharp as a blade. The village was a distant dream now. She needed shelter, and fast. For her, for the yaks, for the hope they represented for the entire community. Boar and Lena, her faithful companions, felt the drastic change in the environment. Their barks, once full of alert, were now low and anxious, their furry bodies tense against the relentless advance of the storm. They huddled close to her, offering a faint warmth, a vital connection that strengthened her. Anya closed her eyes for an instant, seeking the voice of her ancestors in the howl of the wind. They had taught that the tundra, though cruel, also offered refuge to those who knew how to search with an open heart and mind. She visualized the map of her land in her mind, each fissure, each rise, each cluster of rocks. There was a place, a narrow and deep valley, almost a canyon, known as the Shelter of Spirits, which was a few hours' march away. It was a place where the wind lost its strength, and the rocks offered natural protection against the most intense ice and snow. To the Shelter of Spirits, she whispered to herself, her voice hoarse from the cold and effort. We must go, my friends. With a nod, she indicated the direction to Boar and Lena. The dogs, understanding the gravity of the situation, began to guide the yaks, who were already moving with more difficulty, their thick coats already covered by a thin layer of ice. The elder, with each step a battle against fatigue and the biting wind, followed at the rear, pushing the slower yaks, murmuring words of encouragement in her ancestral tongue, words of strength and protection. The air became dense, visibility dropping drastically. Snowflakes, hard as tiny stones, lashed her face, and ice began to accumulate on her clothes, transforming her into a ghostly figure, almost part of the storm itself. The cold was excruciating, penetrating every layer of skin, threatening to freeze the life in her veins. She felt the pain in her knees, in her back, but the image of the villagers' faces, their dependence on the yaks, was a fire that burned in her chest, warming her against the deadly cold. Anya knew that time was her most relentless enemy now. Every minute mattered. She needed to keep the yaks moving, to prevent them from stopping and freezing. The path to the Shelter of Spirits was treacherous, with slippery slopes and rocks hidden under the snow. She used her staff to test the terrain, her eyes narrowed in the growing darkness, relying more on her memory and instinct than on limited sight. Suddenly, Lena, the younger husky, stopped abruptly, barking in an unexpected direction. Anya, her heart sinking, realized that the dog was not alerting to danger, but to a detour. The wind had shifted, and the blizzard was creating new snowdrifts, blocking the path she knew. The shelter of spirits was now harder to reach, perhaps unattainable by that route. A cry of frustration almost escaped her lips, but she swallowed it. The tundra allowed no despair, only resilience and adaptation. She looked at Lena, whose eyes shone with an intelligence that went beyond animal instinct. The dog was pointing to a smaller, closer rock formation, one she had dismissed as not being as safe as the shelter of spirits. It would be a temporary, precarious shelter, but perhaps the only one possible now, the only chance of survival. Anya took a deep breath, accepting the new reality with the wisdom of one who knows nature. Wisdom was not just following the known path, but adapting with courage and faith. The fight for survival was far from over, but she would not bend, not as long as there was a breath of life in her body. Anya took a deep breath, accepting the new reality with the wisdom of one who knows nature. Wisdom was not just following the known path, but adapting with courage and faith. The fight for survival was far from over, but she would not bend, not as long as there was a breath of life in her body. With a nod to Lena, who seemed to understand her decision, Anya changed course. The small, rocky valley, which had seemed insufficient before, was now the only promise of refuge. "Come, my children," she murmured to the yaks, her voice almost inaudible against the howl of the wind. Every step was a battle. The snow, once soft, had now become a heavy and treacherous paste, hiding rocks and fissures. The yaks, with their thick coats, moved with agonizing slowness, their low moans expressing discomfort and fear. Anya, with her staff firmly planted before her, cleared a path, feeling the tip of ice and snow. Her muscles screamed for rest, but the image of the village, dependent on her herd, was a balm for the pain. Boar and Lena, tireless, ran ahead and at the rear, guiding the yaks with short, precise barks, their slender bodies cutting through the wind like arrows. They were an extension of her will, her eyes in the growing darkness. The storm intensified with each passing minute. Snowflakes, now mixed with tiny ice crystals, lashed her face, blinding her and cutting her exposed skin. The air, dense and heavy, made breathing difficult, and the metallic scent of the deepening frost promised an even more relentless cold. Anya felt her eyelids heavy, fatigue threatening to overwhelm her, but she refused. She remembered her grandmother's stories, which said that the tundra tested the spirit, revealing true strength in those who refused to give up. The small rocky valley finally emerged through the blizzard, a dark and imposing silhouette against the furious white. It was not the shelter of spirits, with its high walls and robust protection, but a cluster of smaller rocks, forming a kind of shallow concavity. It would be cramped for the yaks, and the protection against the wind would not be complete, but it was better than nothing. It was the only chance. Anya felt a thread of hope, faint as a candle flame in the midst of the storm, but enough to propel her forward at that moment. "Here!" she cried, her voice hoarse, pointing to the narrow entrance. Boar and Lena, understanding, redoubled their efforts, pushing the yaks into the precarious refuge. The animals, desperate for any relief, squeezed in, their warm bodies offering a little heat to each other. Anya was the last to enter, feeling the immediate relief of having the biting wind a little less aggressive. The space was tight, barely fitting everyone, but the rocks offered a barrier against the worst of the storm. She leaned against one of the stone walls, her body exhausted, but her eyes still vigilant. The blizzard howled outside, a chorus of angry spirits, but inside the sound was muffled, almost a whisper. The yaks, now calmer, began to ruminate, their large, dark eyes reflecting the little light that filtered in. Boar and Lena huddled at her feet, their bodies trembling slightly, but their gazes fixed on her, seeking security. Anya knew the shelter was temporary. The temperature would continue to drop, and food and water would soon be a problem. But for now, they were safe from the most immediate fury of the storm. She needed to light a fire, even a small one, to ward off the most intense cold and offer a little warmth and light. Her numb fingers fumbled in her leather pouch, searching for flint and dry moss. The fight was not over, but hope, fueled by resilience and connection with her companions, persisted. She looked at the yaks, at Boar and Lena, and felt the strength that came from her responsibility. They were her family, her purpose. The night would be long, but they would face it together. Anya, her fingers numb and stiff from the cold, fumbled in her leather pouch, searching for flint and dry moss. Each movement was slow, painful, but charged with a silent urgency. The moss, which she had collected on a less cruel day, was surprisingly dry, a small miracle of the tundra. She carefully placed it on the rocky ground, forming a small nest. Then she took the flint, a worn piece of chert her grandfather had given her, and began to strike it against the old metal of her knife. Sparks flew, tiny ephemeral stars in the darkness of the shelter. Once, twice, 3 times. Her muscles ached and her breath was ragged. Finally, a stubborn spark fell onto the moss, which smoldered and, with a careful breath from Anya, transformed into a trembling flame. The relief the small flame brought was immediate and profound. Boar and Lena, who had been watching with silent anxiety, moved closer, their eyes reflecting the orange glow. The yaks, previously tense, let out soft lowing, and some lay down on the ground enjoying the incipient warmth. Anya fed the flame with small dry twigs she had saved, watching it grow, dancing and casting ghostly shadows on the rocky walls. The smell of smoke, once a sign of danger to the tigers, was now a perfume of safety, a reminder of life's persistence. She held her hands out to the fire, feeling the warmth penetrate her wrinkled skin, easing the numbness. She remembered the nights of her childhood, camping with her family under the starry Yakutian sky, the fire always at the center, a pulsating heart of warmth and companionship. Her father had taught her to respect fire, to use it wisely, for it was both friend and foe. Now it was her most precious ally. The small bonfire, though it could not warm the entire shelter, created a bubble of life in the heart of the storm. Anya looked at the yaks, their eyes large and calm, and at Boar and Lena, who were now dozing, confident in her presence. She felt a wave of love and responsibility, a tight knot in her chest. It wasn't just about surviving the night. It was about protecting these lives, the hope of her village. The storm outside continued to howl, but the sound seemed more distant, muffled by the rocks. Ice and snow accumulated at the shelter's entrance, forming a natural barrier, but also a prison. Anya knew that morning would bring new challenges. Food was scarce, water frozen, and the path back to the village, if one existed, would be covered and treacherous. The victory against the tigers had been a triumph of spirit, but the battle against nature was a war of attrition without truce. She pulled her parka closer, feeling the weight of fatigue. Her eyes, however, remained open, watching the flames. The flame flickered but did not extinguish, a reflection of her own will. She could not afford to sleep deeply. She needed to keep the fire alive, to protect her companions. Ancestral wisdom whispered in her mind, "The tundra is a constant test. He who gives up perishes. He who persists finds the dawn." Anya knew that dawn would come, but the path to it would be long and uncertain. She needed a plan, a new strategy. The shelter was a gift, but not a solution. She needed to find a way out, to guide her herd and her dogs back to the village before cold and hunger overcame them. The resilience that had guided her so far would be her only compass. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, not to sleep, but to visualize the terrain, to feel the winds, to listen to the earth. The struggle continued, but she was not alone. Anya, her eyes fixed on the dancing flames, felt the weight of responsibility tighten her chest. The small bonfire was a warm heart in the midst of darkness and relentless cold, but she knew its life was ephemeral. The moss and dry twigs she had collected were few, and the storm outside promised to last for days. She looked at the yaks, huddled together, their large, furry bodies exhaling a faint warmth that barely combated the cold seeping through the rock crevices. Boar and Lena slept at her feet, their bodies occasionally trembling with the howl of the wind that still resonated, though muffled. The elder ran her wrinkled hand over her face, feeling her skin taut from the frost. Fatigue was a thick fog in her mind, but she could not afford to succumb to it, not in any way. The village, a day's journey in normal conditions, now seemed a distant, unattainable world. The hope of her people, the survival of her family, all rested on her tired shoulders. "How will I guide them home?" she whispered, her voice hoarse, almost inaudible. The tundra, her stern teacher, had taught her that every challenge brought with it a lesson, an opportunity to test inner strength. She closed her eyes, seeking the voice of her grandmother, who always said, "When the path closes, seek a new one. The earth speaks, if you know how to listen." Anya visualized the terrain in her mind, each rise, each depression. The shelter of spirits. Her original destination was now inaccessible. This small rocky valley was a refuge, but not a long-term solution. She needed water. The fresh snow, though abundant outside, was contaminated with ice crystals and not ideal for the yaks, who needed liquid water to stay hydrated and healthy. And food, the little forage she had brought for an emergency, was almost gone. The yaks needed to graze, and the storm made that impossible. Anya opened her eyes, her mind working feverishly. She rose with difficulty, every muscle protesting. She took her staff, and with the help of the flickering firelight, began to inspect the shelter more closely. The rocks were ancient, marked by time and the elements. In a deeper corner, she noticed a thin layer of ice forming on the wall. It wasn't snow, but condensation, a sign that there was some moisture there. With her staff, she carefully scraped the ice, collecting the small fragments in her wooden bowl. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She placed them near the fire, watching them melt slowly. Every drop was precious. As she waited, her eyes swept the ground. There were some exposed roots among the rocks, hard and fibrous, but edible. With her knife, she began to dig, her numb fingers struggling against the frozen earth. Boar and Lena awoke, watching her with their intelligent eyes. They sensed the urgency in her movements. Anya offered a small piece of root to Boar, who sniffed and chewed slowly. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. She needed to maintain her companion's strength as well. The elder knew that the real battle was not just against cold and hunger, but against despair. She needed to keep hope alive, not just for herself, but for everyone under her care. The flame of the fire, though small, was a symbol of that hope. She would feed it with every fiber of her being. The night would be long, but Anya was not alone. Ancestral wisdom, love for her herd, and the loyalty of her dogs were her guides, her unbreakable strengths. She sat down again, watching the water melt, a small triumph against the fury of the tundra. The plan was taking shape, step by step, driven by the resilience that defined her. Anya, her eyes fixed on the bowl where the ice transformed into precious drops, felt the small victory warm her spirit, but the relentless reality of the tundra allowed no illusions. The fire, fueled by the last dry roots she could find, flickered weakly, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock its fragility. The moss and twigs were almost non-existent now. Outside, the storm's howl had not diminished. On the contrary, it seemed to have gained even greater fury, an incessant roar that promised to sweep everything in its path. The cold, which had been a threat, was now a constant and painful presence, seeping into every crack in the rocks, every fold of her parka, every bone of her aged body. She watched the yaks. Their bodies, once robust, seemed more shrunken, and their lowing was rarer, weaker. Some lay down, heads bowed, their large, dark eyes reflecting deep exhaustion. Boar and Lena, though loyal, also showed signs of extreme fatigue. Their tremors were more frequent, and their gazes at Anya were of an almost childlike dependence. The elder's heart tightened. She had saved her herd from the tigers, but now nature itself threatened to take them from her. The melted water was a temporary relief, but there was not enough food, nor lasting warmth. The shelter, which had seemed a miracle hours before, now revealed itself as an icy prison. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, stronger than the wind. "Anya, the tundra does not wait. It demands movement, adaptation. To stop is to perish." She closed her eyes again, not to rest, but to concentrate, to listen to the earth as her grandmother had taught. The earth spoke through the wind, the snow, the silence. There was a sound, a persistent whisper beneath the storm's roar that she tried to decipher. It was the sound of ice, but not the ice lashing the shelter. It was a deeper, more distant sound, like an underground river, or perhaps a frozen stream. Anya opened her eyes, a spark of recognition igniting in her gaze. She remembered an ancient story told by her father about a hidden stream, fed by underground thermal springs, that never completely froze, even in the harshest winters. It was a considerable distance away, in a fissure she had visualized on her mental map of the land, but which she had dismissed as too dangerous for the yaks. But now, with the storm trapping them and the fire dying, it seemed the only chance. The risk was immense. Leaving the shelter meant facing the full fury of the blizzard, the darkness, the cold that could kill in minutes, and guiding the yaks through treacherous terrain with ice hiding deadly traps was an almost impossible task for her exhausted muscles. She felt a tremor run through her body, not just from the cold, but from fear. The fear of failing, of seeing the village's hope vanish beneath the snow. But then she looked at Boar and Lena, at the huddled yaks, and the love for them, the responsibility she felt, overcame the fear. Resilience was not the absence of fear, but the courage to face it. "We cannot stay here," she whispered, her voice firm, though hoarse. "We need to find the water, the stream that never freezes." Boar and Lena raised their heads, their eyes fixed on her, as if they understood every word. The yaks, sensing the change in her energy, also stirred slightly. Anya knew this was the climax of her struggle. The decision to move, to challenge the storm once more, was the most difficult of all. She needed a plan, a path. The fissure leading to the stream was narrow and winding, and visibility was zero. But she remembered another ancestral teaching: when sight fails, trust touch and sound. The earth guides those who know it. She would need to use her staff to feel the terrain and her ears to catch the stream's whisper under the ice. It was a desperate gamble, but the only one left to them. With a deep sigh, Anya began to prepare. She wrapped her face with her fur hood, tightened the laces of her boots. Her fingers, though numb, fumbled for the knife on her belt, the flint and the bowl. She turned to Boar and Lena, her eyes conveying a clear message of determination. "Come, my children," she murmured, her voice full of renewed courage. "Dawn awaits us, but we must walk to find it." She bent down, picked up her staff, and with a last look at the dying fire, began to move towards the shelter's entrance, where the storm howled, waiting for them. Anya's heart pounded, a drum of hope and defiance against the fury of Yakutia. Anya's heart pounded, a drum of hope and defiance against the fury of Yakutia. Raising her staff, she pushed away the snow and ice blocking the entrance to the precarious shelter. The wind, previously muffled, erupted with overwhelming violence, lashing her face and drawing a groan from her lips. The darkness was almost total, a white and impenetrable curtain of snow and ice where visibility was zero. Each breath of icy air seemed to burn her lungs, and the cold penetrated her clothes, threatening to paralyze her limbs. Boar and Lena, sensing the urgency in her movements, positioned themselves ahead, their slender bodies cutting through the wind. Their short, sharp barks were the only audible communication in the storm's cacophony. Anya, with her staff firmly planted before her, began to clear a path, feeling her way across the terrain. The snow was deep and uneven, hiding treacherous cracks and rocks. Her feet sank with each step, and her muscles, already exhausted, protested with every effort. Her grandmother's voice, a whisper in her mind, guided her. "Do not look at the storm, Anya. Look at the earth beneath your feet. It will always guide you." She focused on the sensation of her staff touching the ground, seeking the firmness of the ice, the depth of the snow. Boar and Lena ran in circles, sniffing the air, their instincts sharp as razors. They were her eyes and ears in the furious darkness. The yaks, with their low moans of fear, followed closely, their heads bowed, their massive bodies pushing against each other for warmth and security. With each step, Anya felt the weight of responsibility, but also an unbreakable strength that came from her connection with them. The journey was an ordeal. The wind seemed determined to knock them down, and the cold to freeze her very soul. There were moments when Anya thought she could go no further, that her knees would give way, that despair would swallow her. But then she looked at Boar and Lena, their eyes full of loyalty, and at the yaks who blindly trusted her leadership. She could not fail. The village depended on them. Suddenly, Lena stopped, sniffing the air more intensely, and let out a different bark, sharper, more hopeful. Boar joined her, frantically digging in the snow. Anya approached, her heart pounding with feverish anticipation. She knelt, scraping away the snow with her gloved hands, and felt a different moisture, a faint warmth emanating from the ground. It was the stream that never froze. With a cry of relief that was lost in the wind, Anya began to dig harder, and soon dark, liquid water emerged, bubbling beneath the layer of ice and snow. The yaks, sensing the presence of water, advanced with renewed energy, pushing forward to drink. Boar and Lena lapped the water eagerly, their tremors subsiding. Anya knelt, dipping her bowl into the icy water, and drank, feeling life return with each sip. The stream was in a rocky crevice, offering a little more protection from the wind than the previous shelter. It was not the shelter of spirits, but it was a blessing, an oasis in the ice desert. The water was clean and abundant, and around the crevice there were some clumps of moss and lichen that were not completely buried by the snow. A small feast for the yaks. Anya felt a wave of gratitude and triumph. They had made it. Ancestral wisdom, courage, and the loyalty of her companions had guided them through the fury of the storm. The immediate conflict of thirst and precarious shelter was resolved. Hope, which had seemed a dying flame moments ago, now burned with renewed strength in her chest. The night would still be long, and the path back to the village was still an immense challenge. But now they had water and a little food. True strength, she knew, lay not in avoiding storms, but in dancing with them, in finding life even in the most adverse conditions. With a tired smile, Anya leaned back against the rocks, watching her yaks drink, her eyes fixed on the promise of a new dawn. The fresh water from the stream washed away Anya's exhaustion, a balm for body and soul. The yaks, satiated, grazed on the clumps of moss and lichen in the rocky crevices, their lowing now of contentment, not fear. Boar and Lena, nestled at her feet, lapped the water eagerly, their eyes shining with unwavering loyalty. The shelter in the crevice, though not the shelter of spirits, offered vital protection from the wind, and the oasis of water and food was an invaluable gift from the tundra. Night advanced, and the storm gradually began to lose its fury. The wind's howl diminished to a whisper, and the snow, once an impenetrable curtain, thinned, revealing a sky dotted with icy stars. Anya, exhausted, allowed herself a brief rest, observing the constellation of Ursa Major, which her grandmother called the Great Celestial Yak, a guide for nomads. The sight filled her with peace and renewed hope. At dawn, the landscape was transformed. A vast expanse of untouched snow covered everything, softening the sharp forms of the rocks and filling the fissures. The cold, however, remained biting, and the air dense and heavy. Anya knew that the path back to the village would be long and treacherous, but thirst and hunger were no longer immediate threats. The journey would be a test of her endurance, but she was not alone. With the pale sun barely rising, Anya stood up, her stiff muscles protesting with every movement. She looked at Bor and Lena, already alert, and at the yaks, who watched her with large, expectant eyes. "Come, my friends," she murmured, her voice hoarse but firm. "The village awaits us." Anya led the way, her staff ahead, testing the depth of the snow. With each step, she remembered her father's teachings about reading the terrain, how the wind shaped the snow and revealed hidden dangers. Bor and Lena ran ahead, sniffing the air, their instincts guiding them through the snowdrifts. The yaks, now stronger, followed in single file, their heavy hooves breaking a trail in the soft snow. The journey was slow and arduous. Hours turned into a white eternity, where the silence was broken only by the crunch of snow beneath their feet and the distant howl of some animal. Anya felt the fatigue, but the image of her village's anxious faces, the responsibility she carried, propelled her. She thought of her family, of every member of the community who depended on her herd, and the flame of determination burned even stronger in her chest. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Lena let out a sharp, different bark. Bor joined her, wagging his tail vigorously. Anya looked up and, through the icy mist, saw it, a faint column of smoke rising in the distance. The village. An overwhelming wave of emotion swept through Anya. Tears of relief and gratitude streamed down her face, freezing into tiny pearls of ice. They had made it. Hope was not just a flame within her, it was the smoke on the horizon, the warmth of her home. As they approached, figures began to emerge from the village, small, dark dots in the white immensity. They were the villagers who, seeing the herd and Anya, ran to meet them, their shouts of joy echoing. Children, women, and men, their faces marked by worry, now radiated relief and profound gratitude. The reunion was a collective embrace. Gloved hands touched her arms, voices choked with emotion greeted her. The village elder, with a white beard and wise eyes, approached and held her hands. "Anya," he said, his voice full of reverence, "you have brought life back to us. You are the guardian of our hope." Anya smiled, a tired smile, but overflowing with satisfaction. She looked at her yaks, safe, at Bor and Lena, who were now being petted by the children, and at the faces of her people. True strength resided not in grand confrontations, but in silent persistence, in ancestral wisdom passed down through generations, and in unwavering love for the community. She had proven that, even in the icy vastness of Yakutia, where life was a whisper against the roar of the wind, the human spirit could challenge nature's wildest fury and emerge victorious. The village was saved, and with it, the promise of many winters warmed by the flame of resilience and human connection. Anya, the solitary elder, had found her place in the heart of her people, a beacon of hope in the white immensity. Anya, the solitary elder, had found her place in the heart of her people, a beacon of hope in the white immensity. In the days that followed her triumphant return, the village resounded with renewed energy, an echo of the life she had brought back. Smoke from the chimneys rose thicker, children's laughter was louder, and the adults' gazes at Anya were of a silent yet profound reverence. She was no longer just the yak woman, but the guardian of life, the weaver of hope who had challenged nature itself. Her body, though still sore and marked by the ordeal, began to heal, as did the soul of the village. The women brought her warm herbal teas and nourishing broths, their gestures gentle and their voices soft, laden with gratitude. The children, once a little wary of her austere figure, now approached with curiosity and affection, bringing her small coloured stones or bird feathers. Gifts from their play in the snow. Anya, who for so long had felt like a fragile link to the past, now saw herself as the living bridge to the future. She spent her mornings in the yak enclosure, watching them graze on the fresh forage the villagers had collected with such effort, their robust bodies exuding a comforting warmth. Boar and Lena, her faithful companions, never strayed far, lying at her feet, their attentive gazes following her every move. The connection between them was palpable, an invisible web of love and loyalty that had withstood nature's fury. Anya stroked a yak's head, feeling the rough, warm texture of its fur, and a sigh of gratitude escaped her lips, light as falling snow. At night, she sat by the communal fire, no longer in silence, but sharing her stories. Her voice, once hoarse from the cold, now grew stronger, weaving tales of resilience, of ancestral wisdom, of the strength that resides in unity and respect for the land. The villagers listened attentively, their faces illuminated by the flames, absorbing every word, every lesson. The village elder, Akim, sat beside her, his wise eyes fixed on her. "Anya," he said one night, his voice deep and full of emotion, "you reminded us that true wealth is not in what we possess, but in the spirit we cultivate. You taught us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it." Anya, looking at the dancing flames, felt the warmth not only of the fire, but of the acceptance and love that enveloped her. The loneliness that had accompanied her for so many years dissipated, replaced by a deep sense of belonging. She had faced the fury of 1,000 tigers and the wrath of the storm, but the greatest victory was having rekindled the flame of hope in her own heart and in the heart of her people, proving that life always finds a way. She remembered her grandmother's words, who always said that life was a circle of challenges and triumphs, of losses and rebirths. That winter had been the harshest, but also the most revealing. Anya had discovered that strength was not just physical, but a dance between mind, spirit, and connection with everything around her. The village, now more united than ever, would prosper. The yaks would continue to provide sustenance, and ancestral wisdom would be passed on, richer and deeper through her experience. With a serene smile, Anya closed her eyes for an instant, feeling the warm embrace of the community. The icy vastness of Yakutia remained, imposing and challenging, but now in her heart there was an unwavering peace. She was Anya, the guardian of life, and her story would be a whisper of courage and hope that the wind would carry through generations, reminding everyone that, even in the most extreme conditions, the human spirit, fueled by love and connection, would always find its way to light and life.